Imagine this for a second. You are in a scruffy, completely unknown band from the state of Tennessee.
Right. Just totally off the radar.
Exactly. And you put out your debut record, and suddenly, like almost overnight, you debut at #3 on the UK albums chart.
Which is just a massive accomplishment.
It is. So you are flying across the Atlantic, you're headlining these massive, sprawling European festivals, and you've got tens of thousands of people screaming your lyrics back at you.
Total rock star treatment.
You're being treated like absolute rock royalty. But then, the tour ends, you fly back home to America, you plug in your amps, and you are playing to completely empty rooms.
Like crickets.
Literally, the bartender is sweeping the floor while you play. You sell a measly 100,000 copies in your native United States, and you are essentially entirely ignored by your own hometown.
Yeah, it's a fascinating situation.
It really is. That extreme geographical disconnect is exactly where the story of Kings of Leon really begins. And it just begs the question, how does a band conquer a continent an ocean away while failing to sell out a club in their own backyard?
Well, you have to realize the geographical paradox wasn't a fluke. And it certainly wasn't, an organic accident.
No.
Not at all. It was the direct result of a massive mirage built from the ground up by the British music press. Publications over there, specifically magazines like NME, were just incredibly hungry for an authentic, gritty American narrative.
They wanted a specific story.
Exactly. So rather than reporting on who the band actually was, they essentially fabricated an exotic Southern Gothic caricature just to sell magazines.
Wow, just made it up.
Pretty much. They branded them as the Southern Strokes, giving European audiences exactly the primitive backwoods rock saviors they were craving at that exact cultural moment.
Welcome to Deep Cuts and Deep Thinking. Today, our mission in this deep dive is to completely deconstruct the carefully curated mythology of Kings of Leon. We are going to dig deeply into the fascinating industry mechanics, the bare-knuckle family dynamics, and the hidden musical education that actually built this band.
Because the truth is wilder than the fiction.
It really is, because the story you were sold in the early 2000s, it's completely different from the reality of what happened behind closed doors.
To understand the massive gap between the media myth and the historical reality, we really have to look closely at how these guys actually grew up.
Right, the real backstory.
Yeah, versus how they were packaged and exported to the public. The UK press sold a narrative of these wild, untamed boys emerging from the swamp.
Feral rock stars.
Exactly. But their actual childhood was defined by intense, almost claustrophobic isolation.
The reality is so much more restrictive than a wild rock and roll lifestyle. Let's look at the Followill family for a second. We are talking about 3 brothers, Caleb, Nathan, and Jared, and their first cousin, Matthew. Their childhood was essentially defined by an incredibly strict religious environment and a completely itinerant lifestyle.
Always on the move.
Always. Throughout the late 1980s and 1990s, the family traveled constantly across the American Deep South, moving through Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee.
Just driving from town to town.
Yeah, and all of them crammed into a purple 1988 Oldsmobile.
Which is just a crazy image.
Yeah.
But the driving force behind that constant movement was their father, Ivan Followill. He was an itinerant evangelist minister ordained within the United Pentecostal Church.
And that's a pretty strict denomination, right?
Incredibly strict. This is a denomination known for its adherence to highly conservative doctrines. We are talking about tent revivals, doctrines of divine healing, glossolalia.
Wait, glossolalia?
Yeah, that is the practice of speaking in tongues.
Oh, wow.
And these were incredibly intense, cathartic worship services that would literally last for hours.
And the rules in the Followill household were absolute. These kids were subjected to strict religious mandates that are hard for most people to even comprehend today.
Very sheltered.
Totally. There was absolutely zero secular television allowed.
None.
Zero secular radio. Their entire musical exposure was limited to church hymnals, sacred choral arrangements, and live congregational worship.
Which is wild when you think about where they ended up.
Right, because rock and roll wasn't just a different genre to them. It was explicitly viewed as a worldly temptation that could literally corrupt your soul.
Which meant their earliest musical training was entirely functional. Nathan and Caleb were enlisted into these church services from a very young age, specifically to provide musical accompaniment.
They were put to work.
Exactly. They were hitting drums and singing hymns to sustain the ecstatic, fever-pitch energy of their father's Pentecostal revivals.
Yeah.
That was the absolute totality of their world.
Just the church and the road.
Yeah. But when they hit the UK music scene years later, the British press completely fetishized this deeply restrictive background.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the way the media treated them was almost like, it's like they were looking at an exotic museum exhibit.
Oh, absolutely. That's a great way to put it.
The UK press didn't want to see 4 sheltered kids who were just, discovering secular music and trying to find their footing in a modern world.
That doesn't sell magazines.
Right. They wanted a mythical Southern Gothic stereotype. So they framed them as these primitive, feral, backwoods saviors who magically emerged straight out of the revival tents, picked up guitars, and descended upon London to save rock and roll.
It was a total caricature.
A complete caricature that stripped away their actual humanity.
What's fascinating here is that the mechanism behind that branding makes total sense when you look at the specific European market context of that era.
Give us the landscape.
Well, this is the early 2000s, right after the Strokes released. Is this it?
Huge record.
Massive. And because of it, the UK had developed this massive, insatiable appetite for raw, retro garage rock. But the Strokes were urban. They were New York. They possessed this effortless, detached metropolitan cool.
Very leather jackets and city streets.
Exactly. So the British press realized their audience needed a blue-collar, swamp rock counterpart. They needed mud and denim.
Mud and denim, I like that.
And Kings of Leon perfectly fit that visual and narrative criteria, so the press molded them to fit the mold.
They were cast in a role.
Precisely. And that intense branding explains why their debut album, Youth and Young Manhood, sold over 750,000 copies in Europe and went platinum in the UK, while at the exact same time, it was completely ignored by US rock radio.
I have to challenge this whole discovered in the wild narrative, though, because if the UK press genuinely believed these guys were just fully formed feral rock gods who wandered out of a swamp...
Which they obviously weren't.
Right. The actual reality in America was quite the opposite. We have to transition away from the myth of the backwoods revivalists and look at the bare-knuckle boardroom battles that were actually happening in the Nashville music industry.
Oh yeah, it gets very corporate very fast.
Because they didn't just stumble into a recording studio.
Far from it. The real turning point wasn't a sudden divine intervention. It was a structural family shift in 1997.
What happened?
Ivan Followill resigned from the ministry, and the parents divorced.
Oh, so that breaks the whole bubble.
Completely. This completely dissolved that insular, itinerant religious lifestyle. Suddenly, Nathan and Caleb were unburdened by those previous religious prohibitions.
They were free to explore.
Yeah, so they relocated to Mount Juliet, Tennessee, which is on the outskirts of Nashville, and they actually tried to break into the commercial country music songwriting ecosystem.
Which is such a stark, jarring contrast to the garage rock gods they were later painted as.
Night and day.
They were literally knocking on doors in Music City trying to sell mainstream country songs, and eventually they get the attention of a major RCA Records executive named Peter Edge.
A heavy hitter in the industry.
But here's the crazy part. RCA did not want to sign the Kings of Leon we know today.
Not at all.
The label originally pitched signing Nathan and Caleb strictly as a clean-cut commercial country rock or pop duo.
Just the two of them.
Right. And they proposed backing the two brothers with a rotating cast of seasoned professional studio session musicians.
But honestly, that is a classic, highly effective corporate strategy in Nashville.
Oh, for sure.
You take the raw vocal talent and the brotherly harmony, you strip away the unpredictability of an actual band, and you package them into a safe, controllable, radio-friendly duo.
It makes sense financially.
The session musicians guarantee that the record sounds flawless, and the label maintains total creative control.
I understand the label's logic completely. If you are sinking millions of dollars into an act, you want to eliminate risk. But this is where I really have to push back against the prevailing indie rock myth that surrounded the band for years.
Which myth is that?
Well, Kings of Leon were often criticized as a manufactured corporate commodity created by a major label, or conversely, they were romanticized as a fully formed indie miracle that just sprouted out of the earth.
The feral swamp kids.
Exactly. But neither of those things is true. The brothers actively manipulated the corporate machine. They leveraged the label's desperate interest in their vocal chemistry to force RCA into a corner.
They played hardball.
They basically looked at the executives and said, you want us, you have to sign our younger brother Jared and our cousin Matthew too.
And the audacity of that ultimatum is just staggering when you consider the reality on the ground.
Because they weren't seasoned players yet?
Not even close.
Yeah.
Jared was 16 years old at the time and didn't even know how to play the bass guitar yet.
That is wild.
And Matthew was recruited from Mississippi to play lead guitar despite having very minimal formal rock training.
So they were demanding RCA sign a band that literally didn't exist yet.
Basically. The label was offering Nathan and Caleb a golden ticket, and they were willing to tear it up if the rest of their family wasn't included.
It's an insane gamble. You have a major label deal dangling in front of you, and you risk losing everything to demand they hire your teenage brother who literally does not know how to hold down a bass line.
But it worked.
But they pulled it off. They protected the family unit against the corporate machine.
That specific boardroom fight completely redefines how we should think about artistic integrity, I think.
How so?
Because authenticity isn't always about where you come from or, having some flawless independent origin story playing dive bars for 10 years.
Right, the typical indie struggle.
Sometimes authenticity is entirely about the industry compromises you flat out refuse to make when the money is sitting right there on the table. They refuse to let a corporation turn them into a sterile pop duo.
They win the fight, sure, but that instantly creates a massive logistical nightmare.
Oh, a huge one.
If they weren't feral swamp rockers born with guitars in their hands, and they successfully avoided becoming a slick Nashville country duo played by session pros, how on earth did 4 kids with absolutely zero secular music background suddenly learn how to play raw, compelling garage rock?
That's the million-dollar question.
You don't just pick up an instrument and record a platinum album.
No, you definitely don't. That is where the reality completely shatters the myth. They needed a translator.
A mentor.
Exactly. Their manager, Ken Levitan, realized they possessed the raw energy but lacked the technical vocabulary, so he paired them with a veteran Nashville songwriter and producer named Angelo Petraglia.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I just can't wrap my head around this timeline. You don't just go from strictly singing church hymnals to recording at Sound City Studios.
Sounds impossible.
Someone had to be physically teaching them the mechanics of rock music. How organic could this transition really be?
Well, it wasn't organic in the way the press claimed. That was exactly Petraglia's role. He didn't just help them produce tracks. He provided a highly structured, intense musical education.
Like a boot camp.
Basically. Remember, these guys grew up without secular radio. So Petraglia literally sits them down and forces them to listen to the foundational texts of classic rock and post-punk.
Giving them the homework.
He introduces them to Thin Lizzy, the Rolling Stones, the Clash, the Velvet Underground, and the Pixies. He gave them a crash course in half a century of rock history.
A crash course is one thing, but actually executing it on a major label debut is another. You can't just listen to a Velvet Underground record and suddenly know how to track a professional bass line. How did they practically write these songs?
Through intense hands-on collaboration. Petraglia didn't just play them records. He sat in a room and co-wrote their early demos with them.
He was in the trenches with them.
Very much so. He taught them verse chorus structure, how to build tension, and how to write a hook. He engineered repetitive, driving riffs that a novice like Jared could physically play on the bass guitar, but that sounded incredibly urgent.
Playing to their strengths, or rather their limitations.
Exactly. He fundamentally shaped their songcraft, and then he went on to co-produce that massive debut album, Youth and Young Manhood, alongside British producer Ethan Johns at Sound City Studios.
That still feels like an almost impossible leap for a musician to make so quickly. Going from clapping in a tent revival to co-writing complex, angular, post-punk garage rock in just a couple of years is highly unusual.
It seems impossible until you realize the underlying mechanism at play. They weren't actually changing their emotional language, they were just changing the instruments.
Explain that.
Well, we connect this to the bigger picture. The emotional projection of a Pentecostal pent revival actually translates perfectly to the cathartic tension of rock music.
Oh, that makes sense.
Think about the architecture of a revival service. It builds from this solemn, quiet contrition, slowly ramps up the tension, and explodes into a massive, body-shaking climax.
It's all about the build-up.
Right. And that isn't just a religious experience. That is the exact architectural framework of a great rock song.
Oh, wow. The structure of the sermon literally becomes the structure of the song. The pacing, the emotional manipulation of the audience, the crescendo, they already had a masterclass in that from their father.
Exactly the point. And if you analyze Scala's voice, you hear it immediately. His signature style, those raspy, slurred lead vocals, the throat-strained pitch bends, the unpredictable falsetto cracks.
It's a very distinct sound.
And critics thought he was doing an imitation of British punk singers.
Was he?
He wasn't. That was a direct secular translation of a preacher's fervor. He was using his voice as a rhythm instrument to drive the momentum of the songs, just like he had learned to do in the church to keep the congregation engaged.
Using the voice to lead the room.
Yes. The guilt, the tension between divine redemption and human fallibility, it all poured seamlessly into their Southern Gothic rock aesthetic.
So they took the raw, terrifying energy of the pulpit, stripped out the religious lyrics, and just plugged it into an amplifier.
That's a great summary.
So armed with this Petraglia-guided sound and their Pentecostal intensity, the band explodes in Europe. But again, we come back to that opening paradox. They are starving at home.
Total geographical imbalance.
And this deep geographic dissonance profoundly affected their psychology and their songwriting. You can only be a massive star in London and a total nobody in Nashville for so long before it messes with your head.
Oh, the cognitive dissonance took a heavy toll by the time they were recording their 2007 album. Because of the times, the band was hyper-conscious of this transatlantic divide.
They couldn't ignore it anymore.
No. They'd grown from playing scrappy, fast garage rock into something much more expansive, but they were still haunted by the fact that their own country didn't seem to care about them.
Which culminated in a very specific, almost defiant musical tribute. Unsung. Because of the times, they wrote a track simply called Fans.
A very literal title.
It wasn't subtle in the slightest. It was an explicit, undeniable love letter to their British audiences. The lyrics literally reference all of London singing this song.
Just calling them out directly.
It is a direct emotional acknowledgement of the people who were buying their records, coming to their shows, and screaming their lyrics, all while America kept walking right past them.
It was a pivotal moment of gratitude, but it also functioned as a reflection of their deep isolation. They were pledging allegiance to the only audience that made them feel seen.
So what does this all mean for you, listening right now? I want you to put yourself in their shoes for a second. Imagine pouring your absolute soul into a project, a business, a piece of art, whatever it is.
Your life's work.
Right. You put it out into the world, and your own hometown, your own neighbors, they completely ignore it. They don't see the value. But then you find out that a group of total strangers, an ocean away, think you are an absolute genius.
It would completely mess with your head.
They champion your work immediately. How would that reshape your loyalty? How would that change your identity?
You'd lean into it.
You would probably write them a love letter, too. You would lean completely into the people who validated your existence.
This raises an important question, though, about how that validation completely changed the band's trajectory.
How so?
Because this intense foreign support gave Kings of Leon a profound sense of confidence. The UK audiences embraced them so fiercely that it empowered the band to eventually scale their sound.
They felt safe to experiment.
They realized they didn't have to stay confined to the raw, fast garage rock of their debut. The love of London gave them the courage to expand into the atmospheric, widescreen arena rock that we hear on radio because of the times.
And that critical evolution is exactly what finally allowed them to conquer America. Just a year later, armed with that massive arena sound they developed for the European festivals, they dropped their Grammy-winning global blockbuster, Only by the Night.
Which was just huge everywhere.
They literally needed the love of London to build the confidence to conquer Nashville and Los Angeles.
It's an incredible arc that proves how environment and audience reception actively shape an artist's creative output.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we can finally strip away the caricature. Kings of Leon's early success was absolutely not some divine intervention, and it wasn't a soulless manufactured label plot either.
No, it was much messier than that.
It was this incredibly complex collision of forces. You have a strict religious upbringing providing the emotional, raw material, and structural understanding of how to move a crowd.
Right.
You have savvy, unbreakable family loyalty, protecting them from the corporate machine, trying to turn them into a country pop duo. You have a genius Nashville mentor in Angelo Petraglia giving them the musical vocabulary.
The unsung hero of the story.
And you have a British press that was so desperate for an American myth that they built a pedestal high enough for the band to finally be seen.
It is the ultimate collision of circumstances. But digging through this history does leave us with one final unresolved historical question to mull over.
I love a good mystery. What is it?
We know that formal songwriting credits for Kings of Leon were split 4 ways, equally among all the band members.
Okay.
This was a deliberate, pragmatic choice to keep the family wealthy, united, and free from the kind of petty royalty disputes that destroy so many bands.
Which is incredibly smart business. Everyone gets an equal slice of the pie, so no one is fighting over who bought the bigger house, and the family stays intact.
It is brilliant for family harmony. But because of that blanket 4-way split, the official historical record is permanently obscured.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
The exact extent of Angelo Petraglia's uncredited structural compositional contributions on those first 2 records remains a complete mystery.
Because his name isn't officially dividing up that pie in the same way.
Right. We know he educated them. We know he co-produced and co-wrote early demos. We know he engineered riffs that a novice could actually play.
But we don't know the math.
Exactly. We are left to wonder just how much of that iconic, raw Southern stroke sound was actually written by the seasoned Nashville veteran hiding behind the curtain. How much of their defining early brilliance belonged to the teacher rather than the students?
That is a fascinating thread to pull, and it completely changes how you listen to those first 2 records. The tension between the myth we want to believe and the reality of how art is actually made is always where the best stories hide. And sometimes the truth of 4 kids fiercely protecting their family in a Nashville boardroom is even better than the caricature of wild saviors emerging from the swamp. If you like this episode, please like and subscribe.